Today we're giving our review of Beverly Hills Cop as part of our Classic Rewind. But first, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Poddex, for sponsoring this podcast. Visit poddex.com. Use promo code CinemaGold for 10% off your first purchase. And if you'd like to donate to the show, go to streamlabs.com/cinemagold. Your support is appreciated. So let's begin. In a piece he wrote for GQ a couple of years ago, Mark Harris opined that much of Hollywood's current malaise stems from the mindset of the generation running the studios. Hollywood's recent conservative spiral has come about because the people greenlighting film came of age at the dawn of the modern blockbuster. In his words, quote, "The guys who felt the rush of Top Gun are now in their 40s. And it is their taste, their appetite, and the aesthetic of their late 80s post-adolescence that is shaping movie making." Whether you agree with Harris or not, his argument would help to explain Hollywood's increasingly obsession with remaking every successful 80s film, including Fame, Footloose, Red Dawn, and a host of others. Certainly gives the impression that the 80s was a golden time, with each of these films being classics in their field. But of course, even a cursory glance is enough to debunk this notion. And so it is with Beverly Hills Cop, which now looks really ordinary after more than 30 years on the beat. Just like Top Gun 2 years later, Beverly Hills Cop is a classic example of a high-concept film, an idea supposedly invented by Steven Spielberg, but mostly firmly identified with Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer. It is a film whose entire story is contained in its title or tagline. Eddie Murphy's a cop in Beverly Hills, and Axel Foley's origins in Detroit have no bearing on the story other than create a contrast with the other police force. Frankly, he could be from Florida and it wouldn't be any different to the plot or the comic conceit. We could debate the legacy of Simpson and Bruckheimer all day, but their approach does help to explain a lot of the characteristics of Beverly Hills Cop. Harris again puts it best when he says in the same article, their movies weren't movies, they were pure products stitched together, amalgams of amphetamine action beats, star casting, music videos, and technological adrenaline, all designed to distract you from their lack of internal coherence, narrative credibility, or recognizable human qualities. His comments are echoed by observation John Landis made at a Q&A session in 2009. Speaking about his involvement in Beverly Hills Cop 3, Landis remarked that the first film had a terrible script, and that it was only funny because director Martin Brest allowed Eddie Murphy and Judge Reinhold to improvise most of their dialogue. This might help to explain a lot of the long pauses in between the characters' stories, whenever a big explanation has to take place to their superiors about what happened. The camera just hangs on them for a second, as though Brest was waiting for anything else that was funny. Fittingly, the opening section of the film does owe a lot to Landis. The opening montage is like a blue-collar version of the opening to Trading Places, with the rundown architecture of Detroit and Patti LaBelle's new attitude taking the place of refined New York City building and Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro. Both the opening chase and the final showdown take heavily after the multi-car pileups in the Blues Brothers, though they are executed with much less timing and panache. Had Landis not made such a pig's ear of the third film, you might hazard to say he would have been a safer bet here. Because the film is essentially a star vehicle for Eddie Murphy, you should come as little surprised that the story of Beverly Hills Cop isn't that great. But what's perplexing is that in the right hands, it could have been. The series of events has more than enough twists and turns to make it a decent procedural or mystery drama. Don't get me wrong, it's not Chinatown, but it would have been enough to keep people guessing, if only for a while. Similarly, there is a nice little idea in the character of Axel Foley. Foley is a cop who gets results by going above the law, and the comedy arises from him being put in a place where everyone goes only by the book. Foley's knack of getting results based on his hunches and misdirections could have been explored in more detail, with the consequences of him messing up serving as an emotional anchor. Instead, the closest we come to any kind of anchor is Foley's boss, Todd, played convincingly by real-life Detroit cop Jill Hall. The central problem with Beverly Hills Cop is that it makes the absolute least of its material. Problems with the original screenplay could have been remedied in the direction. The improvisation should have worked wonders considering how talented Murphy was as a stand-up. Instead, all of Murphy's energy is overindulged, repressed, not giving him the boundaries or the character direction that Landis gave him in Trading Places. In that film, Murphy was working within the set boundaries and doing the best he could. Here, he's giving free rein, and so it is very hit and miss, with none of the bad stuff being cut because the script has nothing to fall back on in the first place. As a result of the lack of discipline from both director and star, the plot becomes convoluted to the point where it's almost irrelevant. The audience are spoon-fed all the major plot points through exposition from Foley. Or if not through exposition, then through improv that goes on for too long. Eventually, we give up trying to find out for ourselves who killed Foley's friend, because if we wait around long enough, the film will tell us, and we won't have to think. At this point, you might argue that the majority of the 1980s blockbusters were this asinine and patronizing, and that I'm simply attacking a trend rather than dealing with issues specific to this film. But this line of reasoning can be quickly dismissed by comparing Beverly Hills Cop with Lethal Weapon. Both have similar conceits of an out-of-control police officer working with people of opposite persuasions to take down a dangerous criminal. But Lethal Weapon is by far the better film, with a funnier script, more character development, and direction from Richard Donner, which complements the action rather than just capturing it. Lethal Weapon also has the edge as far as performances are concerned. Whatever you think of Mel Gibson's personal life or political views, he shined as Martin Riggs, and Danny Glover was beyond a perfect match for him. Murphy is talented, and he's working with some talented people in the form of Ronnie Cox of Deliverance fame, Judge Reinhold, who had recently come from Fast Times at Ridgemont High. But other than Jill Hall, none of the supporting cast are strong or convincing enough to rein Murphy in. On top of this, there's also an uncomfortable homophobic undercurrent in the film. This is most likely a product of the time. Hollywood is notorious for the slow speed at which its attitudes towards different social groups changes. But even with the historical context, the mincing depiction of many male characters is offensive and too blatant to ignore. Such events don't derail a film, but only because there's nothing really to derail in the first place. What we are left with is a film of barely passable mediocrity, 100 odd minutes of disposable action and attempted comedy, which don't really hang together and don't amount much to more than escapist diversion. The soundtrack is decent but repetitive. Cinematography is standard, and the ending meets some of our expectations but doesn't deliver any kind of knockout punch. It's not a crushing disappointment in the manner of Beowulf or Atlantis: The Lost Empire. Both of these films squandered great potential, while this has much less to squander in the first place. Instead, it's a film that might induce a chuckle, but mainly leaves us with the resignation that comes from lowered expectations. Beverly Hills Cop is a flat and rather aimless action comedy that hasn't stood the test of time at all well. For all the individual moments where the dialogue sparks, where the action becomes engaging, it has none of the driving energy of Lethal Weapon from the story, direction, or performances. As a comedy, plain and simple, it's just not funny anymore. So with that, we go to our 6 best scenes of Beverly Hills Cop. And number 6 is the very beginning of the movie, and it's the truck chase. It was their early years, but with the name Jerry Bruckheimer and Don Simpson in the credits, we had to get a pointless action sequence. Preferably a chase scene to open the movie. Even with a shootout at the climax, this opening is really the most action-packed part. And other than barely setting up Murphy's character as an undercover cop, it's just meaningless destruction of cars and a token fruit stand. Okay, technically it's a vegetable truck in this movie. The scene would be nothing, of course, without the Pointer Sisters song on the soundtrack. And number 5 is Detroit PD. Yes, I'm already 1/3 of the way through this list. I even made it to Beverly Hills. Who needed that place anyways, other than show a typical 80s class contrast fish out of water story, set in the hub of wealth in sunny California. I'd have been fine with a whole movie set in gritty Detroit, so long as he still had the same Axel, who's already an outsider in his own waters. Plus Paul Reiser as a goofy sidekick, and Jill Hill as Inspector Todd. Did you actually know Hill was actually a Detroit cop and later president of the city council and mayoral candidate? No wonder he's the best tough and angry boss cop in all the movies. He and Reiser had extended presences in the sequel, but they should have just made Beverly Hills Cop 2 completely set in Motor City, and maybe brought Taggart and Rosewood out there for a change of pace. And now we get to number 4, with Serge and Little Lemon Twist. It's a shame that Bronson Pinchot is still mostly remembered for playing Balky on Perfect Strangers, and little else. Not that he was bad on the show, but the show itself was weak. Because I always like to associate him with his parts in True Romance. In this movie, where he's quite memorable, in a very brief appearance, as another character with a silly accent. I can't think of many roles like this. A rare back and forth blend of snobbishness and friendliness. The bit about the lemon twist and the espresso has always made me curious if that's really a thing, because it sounds gross. Of course, you can't pass.
I'm fine. My name is Serge, and how can I help you?
Yeah, I'm looking for Miss Jenny Summers.
She's very busy today. Maybe you give me your name?
My name's Axel Foley.
And what it's pertaining?
I didn't understand what you said.
Pertaining, what it's meaning, regarding.
Oh, what's it regarding? I'm an old acquaintance of hers.
Danae? One moment. Don't run and tell me, Summers, that Mr. Ahmed Foley is here to see...
Axel Foley. Axel.
Achwell?
Axel.
Foley is here to see her. He's an old acquaintance. Donnie, cover this up. It's like
sorry.
the breast of
sorry.
a dog to scrub for the customer. It's not sexy, it's animal.
No, it's not sexy at all.
May I offer you something to drink? Wine, a cocktail, espresso?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
I'll make it myself right back there with a little lemon twist. It's good. You should try it.
No, I'm...
So number 3, Taggart assaults Foley. Normally the scene introducing John Ashton and Judge Reinhold as Taggart and Rosewood and Lieutenant Bogomil wouldn't be something, though, thought of as a favorite, but 3 decades later it plays differently, more ironically, in the context of various beatings and shootings that have given the nearby LAPD and the other police forces, such as Ferguson. Is it still okay to kind of like Taggart, knowing that his punching Axel with little thought was probably just the tip of the iceberg with his abuses of power? Maybe even some level of racism? Another thing, 30 years later, having a protagonist whose personality is so defined by the fact that he swears so much seems pretty simple and tame. Yet Murphy still pulls it off. And now number 2 is Bananas in the Tailpipe. Probably one of my favorite moments. Another brief and memorable character with a funny accent is the fruit peddler played by young Damon Wayans. The gag of the banana in the tailpipes is only complete when you include Axel's meeting with the first team of McCabe and Foster in the line, "We're not gonna fall for a banana in the tailpipe." Again, there's comedy in characters' voices as Axel makes fun of McCabe for sounding too stiff and white.
Can I get some extra mayo?
Certainly, sir.
Thank you.
Ready to go?
Yeah.
There's the Mercedes. We get rid of that stuff? What the hell are you doing?
And at number 1, scene of Beverly Hills Cop, Die Hard in a strip club. Among the movies you could retroactively label Wanted to Die Hard? In titles is Beverly Hills Cop. Well, one isolated part of the movie anyway. The strip club scene, which doesn't have much to do with the rest of the plot, involves a holdup thwarted by the coincidental happenstance of there being a tough cop from out of town on site. Pretend Taggart and Rosewood aren't there, extend the scene to feature length, and you got the makings of another John McClane movie. Thank you for watching this episode of the Classic Rewind Cinema Gold podcast. Let us know your thoughts about this movie in the comments section below. Follow us on Twitter at CinemaGold2. You can like us on Instagram at the Cinema Gold Podcast. Leave us a comment, hit that subscribe button, give us a like, thumbs up if you like it. Or to be fair, give us a thumb down if you don't like it. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.